certainly you have to know the types of studies that require an independent data and safety monitoring board or committee. And there's going to be couple of terms you'll learn that I'm using interchangeably. What's the membership? What the important that the members, all of them are free from any conflict of interest without question. And what are some of the terms that are used? The basis of research ethics, is that we are conducting research involving humans, and it's a privilege to do that. And you have to apply the ethical principles, codes of conduct, and FDA laws and regulations to do this research. And it's becoming increasingly complex, and maybe this is a good thing, but conflict of interest guidelines are now a book long instead of a page long. HIPAA, as we all know, keeping what we do private is invading all of our lives, but it's pretty important. There is oversight in research. Yes, the IRB is the one we all know. IRB is in the U.S. It's other names in the rest of the world. And also data monitoring committees, or DSMB, data and safety monitoring boards. They're the same thing. And the role of these data and safety monitoring boards or data monitoring committees is to protect subjects and help investigators meet their standards. What happened here? Okay, now human subject protection started a long time ago. I mean, the Declaration of Helsinki started in '64, and there's been numerous revisions. The last one I saw was not '09. They talk about the quality of the science, the training of scientists, how to weigh benefit versus risk, and safeguards for the subjects. That's very, very important. And the rights. I mean, even Hippocrates way back then said, first, do no harm. And that's what we do. Now, this is some of the regulations and stuff. I recommend that you look up the Belmont Report. It's readable, makes sense, very common. And ICH E6, the Guidelines of Good Clinical Practice. Certainly, the investigator part is important for everybody to know, not just investigators who are on attendance in this webinar. If there's any statisticians, yeah, E9 is what you want to look at and know quite regularly. But, Department of Health and Human Services, regs, FDA regs, Title 21, Code of Federal Regulations, bingo. Source 312 is drugs, 812 is devices, and a number of FDA guidance documents. They're not the regulations, but it's the FDA speaking, and we should know what it is. Now, it sort of all began, in my view. I was well into my career as a clinical research, but Duke University sort of put their thumbs up or nose up to the FDA and got closed down completely. They could do no research whatsoever. You go to Duke now, and their website on GCP is the best there is. And there's about a dozen universities that have been shut down, like Duke, for ethical reasons or did they something wrong, and they now have the best GCP training sections in their courses. I've taken a number of those courses, and they're really quite good. In September of '99, Jesse Gelsinger was given a drug for gene therapy, and he died. And that was the news, big news for a long time. But there was another one, Johns Hopkins University. Now, that's not a second podunk university. That's a main research university. A 20-year-old lab tech who was the lab tech of the PI inhaled what he thought was hexamethonium, which is a bronchoconstrictor. The subject developed a cough, and bingo, she died. And Johns Hopkins lost all federally funded research until they did what they had to do to clean up that act. Now, we all know this. This is clinical research. I put safety in red because all of the phases of clinical research involve safety of the patient. Yeah, we want to know if the drug works, but is it safe? First time in patients is safe. Healthy volunteers, is it safe? Everyone. And the FDA looks predominantly at the safety data. And in phase 4, even post-marketing safety drugs, PMS, that safety is very, very important. And here are the terms, and I want you to understand that data and safety monitoring plans, the first two, and data monitoring plans, same thing. Some people use one, some people use the other. And those plans are in the protocol, and we'll come to that. The next group of 5 are the typical ones, the data and safety monitoring board. People say data safety monitoring boards, but the and is proper. Data monitoring committees, but independent data monitoring committees, I've seen that a number of times, and I've seen data monitoring board. Board or committee, big deal. And then safety and monitoring efficacy committee. These are the ones we're really talking about in this webinar. Some of the other ones down below, the 4 down below, these could be part of a company. They could be include the PI. They can include the part of the company that writes the protocol. I mean, these are not necessarily dealing with unblinded data. They are dealing with blinded data as a group. Ones we're talking about are the middle group of 5, and they're really all the same. If I mention DMC, I'm also saying DSMB, Data and Safety Monitoring Board. Now, what's the plan? What is it? Who creates the plan? Who's responsible? And what's their function? Now, the plan is well included in the regs. Sponsors of studies evaluating new drugs or biologics or devices are required to monitor those studies. Monitoring. Now, you know, monitors go in and they look at data from the site, but that's not exactly the monitoring that we're talking about in this webinar. A monitoring plan is considered a critical component of the study protocol, and not just how it's monitored, but do you need a DSMB or DMC? And what's the charter? That would be in the protocol, as we know. The activity of reviewing the data collected is to protect the study safety of the participants, and also to ensure that the trial, the study is credible, statistically shows something, and is done properly with no shortcuts, and that the data is valid. You know, basically the ethical conduct of research involving human subject depends upon the assurance that the safety of the participants is protected, the credibility of the trial and the data, and the validity of the data is there without question. The purpose of the plan is to ensure the safety of all participating subjects to the greatest extent possible. They have to plan the ongoing oversight. What are they going to test? ECG, pulmonary function. What blood tests are they going to use? Liver function, liver injury, blood tests, hemoglobin, hematocrit, A1C if it's a diabetic study. In other words, what tests are they going to monitor? And they have to document the conditions and or the frequency that monitoring is done, and to whether or not the plan should state whether or not a study should continue or be stopped based on certain data that the PI agrees upon. In the charter, it specifies the responsibilities of the DMC or DSMB, or even the other ones if the other types are required. In other words, if the types related to the company, it should still be in the plan. You can have more than one. Now, all these plans include a description of how you report the adverse events to IRBs, to the sponsor, or the NIH, which is a sponsor, or the FDA. And the investigators must ensure that the sponsor is informed of any action, if any, which is taken by the IRB. And that's part of the protocol, and that's part of the 1572 that the investigator signs. Okay. The reporting requirements to the sponsor, which also the NIH is a sponsor for investigator-initiated studies, may range from adverse event reports or summary reports from the monitor or the monitoring group in specific cases. The PI might be required to submit adverse event reports directly to the sponsor. That has been done. I've seen it. Adverse events go to the IRB, but they don't really want them weekly. They want them as frequently as necessary, but believe me, it's not a foregone thing. The minimum required plan content includes who's responsible for monitoring, what data will be monitored, which is, of course, consistent with the protocol. And of course, it's all the safety data. And it's all the adverse events, that is for sure. What process will be used to collect data? We have to have access to all of the data collected, and that's the process, how you get to it. And specifically, adverse events and serious adverse events are always a part of the plan. You have to have those because they are their keystone of something that might be wrong. So the plan must also include the characteristics, i.e. the IE criteria, inclusion-exclusion criteria of the population, safety endpoints and how they're assessed, how you're assessing liver function or liver injury, listing of expected events. Now, we all know that drugs have been tested maybe on a time before. This is a phase 3. There's phase 1 and 2A and 2B. And you should know events that have occurred in the wild. And there's also background adverse events. If you're doing a benzodiazepine, would you not find a background adverse event of being sleepy? Obviously, any doc would know that. And then who reviews the safety data? Obviously, the PI must be aware of it and must review it. That's part of his or her job. And what are the criteria to discontinue a study? And they have to be pretty well spelled out. Obviously, some serious adverse event or series of serious adverse events, or obvious evidence of liver failure or cardiac failure or hematological problems, those criteria should be in there. And in the plan, it should be indicated whether there's going to be a data monitoring committee, DSMB, or not. And who's the medical monitor? Who's going to be involved in this? The charter has the responsibilities of everyone, the list of their members and credentials, any conflict of interest, and what are the rules to minimize conflict of interest, how often you meet, and what's the format of the meeting. I've been on a DMC where we met monthly in person in a town which was sort of central to all of us, and yet we met weekly by telephone. What's the frequency and the format, personally or by phone or by even a webinar like what we're doing right now? How is the data organized, and what's the methods and timing and voting of the data? How did I, at a DMC, vote on data, vote on what I saw? Should I stop it? Should we continue it? Is it not important? Is it important? And description and documentation of the meetings has to be very clear. And with each meeting, you would say, the data we've done so far doesn't have any impact on the study. The data has been collected correctly, and there are no life-threatening adverse events that we see. Studies that require a plan, any study with human volunteers have to have a plan. And, study participants' safety information is to be monitored. That's in the plan. Actually, all FDA and National Institutes of Health clinical studies require a formal DMP plan, whether or not a committee or board is required. When the DMC meets or DSMB meets and how they function, either charter, is determined in the DMP, the plan. Got it? When to discontinue a study? One of the main functions is stopping rules. If in the study, as a DMC member, I see clear evidence of harm or harmful adverse events, or maybe absolutely there's no change between the placebo and the pain, so there's no likelihood of any benefit, or there's overwhelming evidence of benefit. In other words, from what I'm seeing, that drug is it's fabulous. And I was medical monitor of a committee that all of a sudden 2 patients developed very, very high amino transferases, and the PI, before he contacted, I was the medical monitor, before he contacted us, broke the blind on both of those subjects, which means they were out of the study. And it turned out that one was a patient receiving the drug and one was a placebo patient receiving a placebo. I asked him, get the evidence as to what their sugar intake was. And he came back and very, very embarrassed, realized that both of these 2 patients had ingested humongous amounts of candy or sugar prior to the blood test. He didn't really know that that will cause an increase in the aminotransferases. Now, the liver function tests, the bilirubin, the INH, and albumin, they weren't changed. But he broke the blind because the aminotransferases were quite high, not knowing that sugar can produce that height. So you have to understand that. Basically, monitoring data and safety is putting the subject safety under a microscope. It's under the microscope in the plan and in the committee. IDMC, Independent Data Monitoring Committee, same thing. Stopping rules is a real problem, and that's got to be in the plan, and it's in the committee also. Generally 2 types: safety. In other words, if certain AEs occur, these might be expressed as a statistician point of view, or rates between treatment and control group, and the only ones who know those rates are the independent DMC or DSMB, because they look at unblinded data. Also, efficacy rules. We draw conclusions based on the main trial question, and this could be the drug works perfectly, or this drug doesn't do anything. There's been no change. And you wouldn't carry on a year-long study or a 6-month-long study if in 3 months you found there was absolutely no change whatsoever in any of the variables. And as a matter of fact, the stopping rules are in the plan, okay? But the DMC can override them and say, no, we'll jump the gun and we'll continue the study for now. The efficacy doesn't tell us what we thought it should, but we're going to continue. Now, the committees are the important thing. And what are they? What are the reasons who creates them? Who's responsible for them? And what is their function is what we're going to be looking at. The definition, a data and safety monitoring board or data monitoring committee is a group of independent scientists who are appointed to monitor the safety and scientific integrity of a study, of a research study, and to make recommendations to the sponsor, for stopping a trial for efficacy, i.e. it doesn't work, for harms, i.e. it has some adverse events that are considered a problem, or for futility. In other words, this study is going to show us nothing. That drug does absolutely nothing, bad or good. It's like a placebo should. But that's a clear definition. A DMC, you have to understand, and I've underlined it, is a group of independent individuals. And they have a variety of areas of expertise. One of them, I was a family doc type, which I've done family medicine for a number of years, and I was just a general physician. And another one, I was a clinical pharmacologist. They needed somebody who had expertise in drugs. And also, we have to confidentially review the data on an unblinded fashion. And we advise, the committee or the board advises the sponsor regarding the continuing safety of the participants, either those on or those about to be recruited, as well as the continued validity and scientific merit of the study. Now, this is a very clear statement, and it was in an FDA guidance on safety monitoring. Very well done. Main issues, okay? There must be no conflict of interest among any of the members of the board or committee. And there must be total confidentiality of any communication. We didn't do a lot of email. We did, or a lot of computer things because of the problem of worrying about hacking. But, phone calls can't be hacked, so we did some phone calls in the presence of the group in a given meeting. What happened here? Okay. The reasons for a DMC is both ethics and a bit insurance. The ethics is to ensure subject or patient safety and to be able to react to problems and untoward events in a fairly rapid way. And if I oversight a study conduct progress, I can pick up or stop a study, or I can find out whether this drug is doing anything, and ensure the study's on track. The statistician has said I need X number of patients to get an N of so-and-so that gives me a confidence level of 0.001 if that's what we're aiming for. And you get early warning. That's important. What studies require DMC? Obviously, high-profile studies, those that are going to have a large impact on practice. I was involved in studies with the PCSK9 drug that lowers cholesterol. As you know, the statins are a problem, a lot of side effects of statins, and this study on this PCSK9 was really important, had a high impact, because there's a lot of docs that would use a safe drug versus the statins, and turned out that way. If survival is the outcome, in other words, this is done in cancer or end of life, and we're trying to prolong life, that's an important issue. Studies of unknown or greater than minimal risk. If I don't know what that drug's going to do, I want a data monitoring committee. If I know the drug is a cancer chemotherapy, and there is risk to taking those drugs. I want a Data Safety Monitoring Board. And probably one of the most important is multi-center international studies, whether it's phase 3 or 4. If you get a large study, you have to be sure that each group, each site is operating in the same way and getting the same results. And if one site all of a sudden has all kinds of adverse events, like my increase in aminotransferases with sugar, I mean, that type of thing, it has occurred. And studies with large number of patients, if you're involving the safety of a large number of patients, you have to be very, very, very careful. And if the trial is large, i.e. large number of patients, stated another way, it's a blinded trial, or vulnerable populations. And to look at the vulnerable population, pediatric, life-threatening diseases, emergency treatments, for example, psychiatric patients who are unable to consent, and there are a lot of studies getting drugs to improve their outcome. Persons in poverty, you get paid a certain amount, not a lot, but it can be a monetary coercion for people who are very, very poor. Pregnancy, got to protect the unborn. The elderly, got to protect us old folks who don't think as clearly as people would like us to think. Now, the regulatory requirements, I've mentioned before, the regulatory requirements for drugs, biologic, and devices state that this must be monitored. The FDA does not state that you have to use a data monitoring committee or DSMB in trials, except for research studies in emergency settings. Research studies in emergency settings, when you may not get a typical informed consent, and the person is invulnerable because they may be out of commission, they may be in a coma or something like that. These you must have a data monitoring committee. Always, always, always. There are several different groups that may assume or share responsibility for various aspects of a trial. You know that the IRBs. Now, IRB is what the U.S. uses. Independent Ethics Committee, IEC, is Europe and most of the world. REB, Research Ethics Boards, is Canada. Clinical Trial Steering Committee, that could be one. And then Clinical Endpoint Assessment or Adjudication, all kinds of committees, all kinds of names. But sometimes the investigator has a frontline responsibility for monitoring. The sponsor, they have to send to the FDA adverse events within a set period of time. It varies with the study, it varies with the type of study, but that is determined before the study starts. And the FDA has to review the data in a timely manner. Okay. The NIH view of the charter. The National Institutes of Health is the sponsor on investigator-initiated trials, and the plan must spell out how the DMB will function, the board will function, and this is the charter. The charter is in the protocol, and that tells in the plan how the DSMB will function. The duties and responsibility, the composition, what types of people are in there, the form of the meetings and how it will be organized, and how they will document and how they will make decisions. That all has to be in the charter. And of course, a statement regarding confidentiality. And I recommend that looking at that reference, because it really states it quite clear. Sorry, it jumped ahead and I thought it was jumping back. The charter of a DMC committee, what's in the charter? The responsibilities, list of members, list of conflict of interest minimization rules, how often you meet and what's the format of the meeting, whether it's by phone, in person, where, when, all that business, and methods of, or organization of the data. You can't look at all the data all the time. One call or one meeting, we're looking at all the laboratory data and then anything else that's in the background. How do we vote? What's the methods, timing, and voting of data reviews? That has to be pretty much described, written out. And what's the documentation of the meetings? And a statement by the in the charter as to the impact or potential impact of the study. Sponsors of well-controlled studies should take appropriate measures to minimize bias. Duh. And written procedures, such as this is in the regs, such as the DMC charter, to ensure minimization of bias and maintaining confidentiality of the interim data. Only a DSMB or DMC can look at unblinded data. And on that DMC, you will see, is only independent people. Scientific validity is very important. You know, time may affect the disease understanding in trial population or treatment standards. And so that has to be included when you're looking at data from a large long-term study. Is there a reason to modify IE criteria or endpoints or the trial size without the knowledge of the sponsor or study staff of the reasons? The DMC would say, the statistician from the DMC would say, wait a minute, we need more people because of these events that are coming up. I need to have a larger N statistically, and we can get it, but you don't tell the sponsor or study staff why. If a trial organizer ever reviews interim data, they now there's no semblance of objectivity, even if they don't make a change. I want to look at the data, but I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to make any changes. I just want to look at the data. Can't do that. Unway can't do that. Interim data, whether treatment assessment is revealed or blinded, must be most secretly protected from any access by the sponsor or the people who are on the team that are doing the study, the sponsor and the PI and the study staff. They must know nothing without question. There's an increase in the number of data monitoring committees or DSMBs in recent years. Growing number of industry-sponsored trials with mortality or major morbidity endpoints. We're doing studies with more serious diseases. Increasing collaboration between industry and government. Increasing awareness within the scientific community of clinical trial conduct issues. And analysis which is subject to bias. So the analysis may, in some studies, has to be done by the DMC or DSMB. And there are concerns of IRBs regarding ongoing trial monitoring and patient safety in of a large trial or multi-center trials. You might have multiple IRBs or you might have a single IRB for a multi-center trial. It also depends upon, you know, how it's set up. But they have concerns, and that's the reason for doing it. Function of a DMC, Independent Data Monitoring Committee, or a DSMB, they want to review the protocol, the investigator's brochure, the informed consent form, and the plan. That's the first thing they do. They review adverse events, serious adverse events, and such things as dropouts or any symptoms people have, any lab results, any statistical evidence at all that things are going well or not going well. They review new information from this trial or similar studies using the same therapy. That's more data for them because they are blinded. They are unblinded. They can look at the unblinded study data from a study and compare it with another study. And that gives them further information to give recommendations to the sponsor. They evaluate the progress of the trial, whereas a person who is blinded can't evaluate the progress. Conduct interim analysis, but they don't do that very often, and ensure confidentiality of the trial data. One of the main functions is to maintain integrity, and this is compromised if anyone knows ongoing results, has the ability to change the protocol. Now, the DMC can make recommendations to change inclusion criteria, the endpoints, or size of the trial, and these are best made by those without knowledge of the accumulating data. In other words, if I have knowledge of accumulating data and I make those things, that has to be done very, very carefully. DMC does not do that usually. Sometimes they do, and that's keep in mind. If a data monitoring committee looks at interim data, the p-value adjustments are necessary. So to avoid overreaction to early trends using more strict stopping rules, where your alpha is 0.001, depends upon the alpha spending techniques used and the number of interim analysis planned, i.e., you do not want to have an unlimited number of interim analysis of data. The key is to maintain an alpha level equal to or less than 0.05 for the final and last analysis of data. And believe me, the statistician is an essential component of this progress. I have never been on a DMC where a statistician wasn't, he is the one looked up to because he gave us more information than we really knew. We knew the safety aspects, but we didn't know the statistical. Now, there are three types of statistician involved in the process. There would be the DMC member who is a statistician, and there may be more than one. They're unblinded, but they wouldn't see all of the data, or they wouldn't perform an analysis. Okay? There may be a protocol statistician who remains blinded and not involved in the report of the data monitoring committee. And there could be an independent statistician who is unblinded, who prepares the reports and is present and presents the results at the DMC committee. He's independent. He's not part of the DMC or DSMB. He's not part of the company. He's a totally independent statistician. And he does unblinded reports to either the open or closed meetings. Think about these three. These are very, very, very important. Now, using a data monitoring committee for safety reasons, that's risky. Blinding of committee members impose, some sponsors say, well, wait a minute, I don't want anybody to know of our data, so they have to be blinded. If a DMC member is blinded, they really cannot do the functions of a data monitoring committee or data safety monitoring board. And blinding is not FDA or ICH mandated. In fact, ICH E641 and 45, interim analysis requires unblinded access to treatment group. But you don't do interim analysis very often. There's a connection to the IRB. The activity of viewing the data collected with a goal of protecting the safety of a study participant is also the purview of the IRB. It states in both of those references, 56, 312, and 812, either 40 and 150, that individual investigators or the sponsor of investigational devices, could be the NIH, are responsible for assuring that IRBs are made aware of all and any new information that arises from a clinical trial. So you've got to let an IRB know that there's something new from the DMC or from whatever. IRBs are charged to determine whether risks to subjects are minimized using procedures which are consistent with sound research design. Now, they may require or request the approach to trial monitoring for early termination when relevant, and what steps the sponsor is taking to minimize risk to the patient or the subject volunteer, whatever you want to call them. The IRB can request things, and they might even get involved. I've known of IRBs that requested a data monitoring committee be involved, which means the sponsor has to put a data monitoring plan in a revised protocol and do a charter because the IRB has requested it for some reason. I'm sorry, something's happening here. Size and composition of the, what's the size of the DSMB? What's the composition? How do you select members? How do you deal with conflict of interest? Where do you meet in reports? We've talked about that. I have heard of 3 as a minimum size for a data monitoring committee, a couple of clinicians, and a biostatistician. Notice the biostatistician is in every one of them. Typical size is 5 or 6. And one of the clinicians is a specialist. I did a study once, I was on a DMC with we had a urologist because this drug was going to be used in urological patients. You had a biostatistician, and usually if you can get an ethicist, somebody who that's their specialty, and they may or may not be a physician. And I've heard of maximum size of 10, which is a very large multi-study, usually a couple biostatisticians and a couple of ethicists and a couple of people who are not medically trained. They represent the general patient population. That's important. Now, prior data monitoring committee is of value, and you want to get males and females, and you want to get ethnic representation. You certainly want to get clinicians with expertise in the specialty. If it's cardiovascular drug, somebody's got to be a published reference in that particular specialty. Biostatisticians, and not every biostatistician is involved with clinical trials, but there are those that's what they do. Medical ethicists, they have to know about clinical research. Some studies, they get clinical pharmacologists, toxicologists, epidemiologists, a laboratory scientist, or for some devices, an engineer. These are people who know the product or the toxicology of the product or how it works very well. And often a lay person with study population expertise. That's the ideal. Now, you're not going to get a lot of people, but these are who are in data monitoring committees or data safety monitoring boards. How do I make the decision as to who invited? I want physicians with relevant expertise, statisticians with clinical trial, persons with clinical trial experience, and previous experience on a DMC. I'm sure that's why I was on more than one, because once you're on one, they know what you know. But all of the people, everyone on a DMC must be free from or lack a significant conflict of interest, or even the appearance of one. We could not have had any relationship. The PI couldn't be my brother. I could not be a consultant for the company. I could not be on the board of the company. I could not be on anything. That is very, very, very important. Now, as far as those who are not selected, and in this latest edition, I put the not in red because it's important. Members of the company, the sponsor, or clients of either the company or the sponsor. An investigator who's participating in the trial, either a sub-I or PI, They could never be in a DMC. Investigators who work as consultants for a company or on the board of a company or the sponsor, they're not on this study, but they have contact with the company or sponsor. Any individual who can influence the recruitment process. Individuals with data classification responsibilities in that particular study, in that particular company. And individuals who can influence the design, objectives, or analysis of a given study. In other words, they're part of the company, even if it's a consultant or something. You've got to get very, very independent people. Conflict of interest is very important. You've got to be free from financial interests, which could affect the outcome of a trial. They are not investigators who enter subjects or who recommend subjects. I'm a urologist. I recommend subjects to my colleague, my friend, or even a stranger who's a urologist in a given study. I cannot be in a DMC in that particular study. If someone has strong views regarding the trial and the intervention, this is called an intellectual conflict of interest. This is not political views, but you all know people that have very, very strong views on something. Have no relationship with the leadership of the trial. You're not a partner in the practice of the PI. You're not a department colleague. You're not associated with the company at all. The most important issue about the composition of a DSMB or DMC is not the number of members, but the ethics, honesty, and that all members are totally and absolutely free of any significant conflict of interest. Wow. No one on a DMC or DSMB may have any connection with the agent being tested. Any connection whatsoever. Conflict of interest defined, it's any financial incentive which would cause an investigator to lose their objectivity or create the appearance thereof in design, conduct, reporting of research, which compromises the scientific integrity and may negatively impact on the public trust. Now, you may have noticed a couple of slides missing. They're stuff for you to read, but initially this talk was designed for 2 hours, and we've not even done an hour yet, but there were some slides I sort of took out. And, basically the second paragraph, conflicts of interest, really all about money, power, greed, and ego, where the interest of the sponsor or the investigator comes first at the expense of the subject and then the public. That sentence, I think you should circle it. That's very, very important idea. An overview of conflict of interest that exists when the safety and welfare of research subjects is subordinated to or compromised by financial interests or the pursuit of personal gain by those involved. That's another way of stating that paragraph on the last slide. A conflict of interest occurs when someone contemplating conducting a research study using human volunteers has competing professional or personal objectives or personal or financial interests that would make it difficult to fulfill the duties fairly. Believe me, there is books written on conflict of interest. Exist when the safety and welfare of a subject are subordinated or compromised by the financial interest. Another way of saying the same thing. These come from different sources. Occurs when someone contemplating conducting a research study using human volunteers has competing professional or personal obligations or or interests that would make it difficult to fulfill the duties fairly. These all say about the same thing if you look at it. It can be anything, personal, financial, academic, religious, or political, which, when revealed at a later time, would make a reasonable reader feel misled or deceived. A confidential interest is a financial or personal relationship that influences actions. And the potential for it can exist whether or not the individual believes. I may say, no, I'm completely independent about this. But it still can exist if the reader can think, oh, I apologize. The reader can think that may happen. General Accounting Office reports if the investigator or the institution has a significant financial interest in the research, this may focus attention on financial rewards of the research. And this was very true in the Jesse Gelsinger, University of Pennsylvania report. The PI was on the board of directors of the company that made the product type thing. Got to watch that. It's often potential rather than actual. And it could be competing rather than conflicting. A PI's commitment to patients' welfare and also the scientific research rigors of a research study. Well, we've all done studies that, there are some questions in there. Having a COI in itself is not wrong and may be unavoidable, but you want to be sure that it's transparent. Now, let's talk a little bit about DMC, DSMB meetings. Member status, types of meetings, open meetings or closed meetings, role, what are the reports, and what is the format of the report. The key reason for unblinded monitoring is that DMC, IDMC, DSMB, DMC, independent group, no conflict of interest, no vested interest, no decisions. They make no decisions. And the charter describes the empowerment roles, the boundaries and the responsibilities involved. Bingo. The members being unblinded is essential. If you ever hear of a DMC or DSMB or IDMC that is blinded, that is incorrect, and that sponsor is acting unethically, because the sponsor would be the one to say, I want a DMC, but they got to be blinded like everybody else. They got to know what's going on. They're open and closed meetings. In an open session, you would only talk about blinded data. And either talk is by the statistician or the chair of it. In a closed section, usually there's the independent statistician, and here unblinded results can be discussed and recommendations made. In other words, you know exactly what's going on. That is the most confidential meeting there possibly can be. One of the meetings I was DMC, we were semi-blinded, but from the data, the data unblinded us because it was so crystal clear which patients were getting the drug and which were getting not. And it was just crystal clear. And that's the way it is sometimes. Open meetings, you may have people from the sponsor, the PI, the steering committee, the FDA. Anybody could attend an open meeting. And if it's a large multi-center, multinational trial, that often is, you're going to get FDA or IRB or all kinds of people. In the open session, the information discussed is the non-confidentiality. It's blinded. You might be talking about recruitment statements, how difficult it is they've been able to recruit the patients based on the IE criteria. What are the baseline characteristics? Does it follow the IE criteria? What's your ineligibility rate? If you're doing a study, the IE criteria that you got, your rate is 50% of ineligible, well, maybe that excludes far too many people. How many protocol deviations are occurred? And what's the nature of any violations, obviously? There should be none, of course. The PI should follow the protocol to the letter. Any administrative data or any external data from the sponsor would say, I notice a report finished by X company with X drug that's very similar to our drug, and this report indicated, and he can bring that up in an open meeting. They're very, very, very fascinating. The report is signed by the chair and has one of the following general recommendations. The study is to continue as presently conducted. That means there has been evidence that it's working, and evidence that it's not toxic. It is no, the subjects, study participants are protected as far as safety is concerned. Or the study continues with the following modifications, and they'll become amendments. For example, it appears that a couple of PIs have ordered, which they can, an ECG at day 6 or something, and because they noted there was a change. And this is appropriate. From now on, we do ECGs at that time for all subjects. So the DCMB will say at this juncture report that the amendment of changing a number of safety tests like the ECG or pulmonary function or a lab test changes. Or they can say the study must stop, okay? And the patient's currently under treatment should be followed for X months until their body is completely through with the drug. And if any adverse events continue, that should be rechecked. Or the study should have ceased according to the stopping rule, which would be in the charter of the DMC, which states if the DMC DSMB recommends stopping, that the sponsor, as the final say, but the sponsor would agree that they have to stop. Sorry about that. You have to understand that the role of a Data Safety Monitoring Board, or DMC, is advisory. Their major role is to preserve the trial, preserve the integrity of the trial, preserve the safety of the trial, preserve the integrity of the data and its reasonableness. They review the protocol as the trial progresses, and they review the data quality. They review what's going on. They assess safety at all levels of the study. And they also assess whether the drug has been effective or has absolutely no effect whatsoever, has not changed one thing. You can't tell placebo versus another. And are the sample size assumptions and the impact of the study as they were proposed? And that's where your statistician is going to come in, because they're going to see, they're going to look at the statistics of adverse events or SAEs and so forth. And then the Data Monitoring Committee recommends or advises the sponsor to continue as planned, or to temporarily stop until some issue is involved, or the amendment is made, so there's been a change in the protocol, and then the statistician comes in and does a redo with the numbers and modifications to the protocol. Or they can even say, we recommend early termination. We recommend termination instantly, and the subjects being treated the following way. That's a recommendation, an advisory. The sponsor can say, no, this is too important, we're going to continue. But of course, the IRB will be involved, the FDA will be involved, and usually the recommendations of a well-appointed data monitoring committee or data safety monitoring board is taken without question. Now, we talked about the DMC report, and this is a fairly typical report, just check the boxes, but it's signed by the chair and it's been voted on. A given report, whether it's monthly, 6 months, a year, depending upon the study, trial to continue without change. And the trial protocol should be modified. The second one would be, you might check the protocol is modified as follows. And they would list the increased number of tests, tests that didn't show anything up to that point that could be dropped, you know, that they expand the seriousness of it. And one of the things that one of the committees I was on, we suggested very early that they do proper liver function tests. As I'm sure you all know, liver function tests are bilirubin, INH, you know, prothrombin, and albumin. Those are the three and only liver function tests. The aminotransferases, all of, you know, ALT, AST, and all that stuff, those are liver injury tests. And you don't rely upon those. So they did, and, you know, the aminotransferases continue to go up and down like they always do, but the bilirubin, INH, and albumin stayed the same. So those are modifications that a DMC could make. And if they make that the trial should be terminated, they have to be very specific about it, and that's why the termination are listed. And usually they may check off that, but there's usually a several paragraph explanation by the DMC as to what the reasons, what are my serious concerns about the subject safety or the device. Do I think that benefits outweigh the risk to subjects or do not outweigh the risk to subjects? If the drug has significant risk to subjects, but also some improvement, a decision has to be made based on all the data as to whether the benefits outweigh the risks or not. Or trial outcomes do not justify the risk. In other words, the risk of safety is, there's a lot of changes, ECGs changes, pulmonary function changes, chest x-ray changes, whatever they're testing, lab changes, hematological changes, and so forth. The risk, just the trial outcome doesn't justify the risk, or the benefits don't outweigh the risks. And then there might be new developments from other drugs, from other studies that impact subject safety, and then they have to write about that. New develops on something, you know, we learn something in medicine, I'm sure you're all aware, every single solitary day. And if the data monitoring committee say, wait a minute, this is an unreasonable degree of difficulty of the procedures. You know, for example, a study in asthma that wants pulmonary function tests done every hour or too many. I mean, if any of you have ever had a pulmonary function test, that is a taxing test. ECG, no, it's not taxing. You can have them pre-wired and just press a button and get the ECG. But some tests, you know, for example, some require exercise-induced ECG periodically, and that may produce shortness of breath in far too many patients. So unreasonable degree of difficulty procedures, lumbar punctures. Now, if the incidence of headaches following lumbar punctures is 0, then that may not be an unreasonable degree of difficulty because you've got a neurologist who knows what he's doing. So all these things have to be taken without question.